Mood, 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 mood. A mood.
Everything you need to easily pass English ATAR. English ATAR made simple. Powered by Saints Coaching.
Mood. What a great word. Very useful in every life situation. But this lesson is not about the adjective mood, it's about the noun mood, the concept of mood. It's appeared twice in past WACE exam questions. We've got, firstly, one that came up in 2017 in a form of your choice. Create a text that explores a mood or idea from this image. And then from the 2022 exam, we have create a text that uses language features to sustain a mood or tone associated with its genre. You might be happy to know that mood doesn't actually appear in the syllabus points. Hold it right there. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, it's not in the syllabus points. I'm just going to skip this lesson. Before you do that, hear me out. There is a method to the madness. The reason we are looking at mood despite it not appearing in the syllabus is because, as we saw on the previous slide, it's popped up in 2 past WACE exam questions. You can refer to it in a bunch of exam questions that don't explicitly mention the term mood. And, as we'll soon see, it's mentioned in the SCARSA glossary. Those are 3 very good reasons why you should continue watching this lesson and complete the very short activities related to it. Those reasons tell us that just because it isn't in the syllabus, you are still assessed on it. Lesson objectives. Firstly, we will define mood, then discuss the construction of mood, outline the textual features that influence the construction of mood in visual/multimodal texts. Then we will analyze an example of mood in a visual text, outline the textual features that influence the construction of mood in written text, analyze an example of mood in a written text, describe a tip for discussing mood, then explain the influence of mood on our response to a text. Then we'll analyze past WACE exam questions. We will discuss analyzing mood. We will discuss creating mood, and then we'll outline a simple summary. Definition of mood. What does mood mean? This is what the SCARSA glossary has to say about mood. The atmosphere or feeling in a particular text. For example, a text might create a somber, reflective, exhilarating, or menacing mood or atmosphere depending on the imagery or other language used. So mood equals the atmosphere or feeling of a text. According to literarydevices.net, a very useful website, atmosphere is a type of feeling that readers get from a narrative. So the word feeling is the common denominator here. Considering that, we're going to go with the following definition. Mood is simply the feeling created by a text. Next up, construction of mood. Mood is the feeling created by a text, but how exactly is such a feeling created? How is a feeling created by a text? Let's see how this plays out in visual and multimodal texts first. To save time, I'm not going to repeat the term visual multimodal text. I will just refer to this as simply visual texts. The following textual features influence the construction of mood in visual texts. The list that we're about to see is not exhaustive, it's not complete. There are other textual features that can influence the construction of mood in visual texts. But unless you're wanting to get an English ATAR average of 90% or higher, you'll be just fine knowing the ones that we're about to go through. Firstly, music, then lighting, color, setting, costume, editing, camera shot, angle, and movement. Hopefully, you've already got a decent idea of what each of these features are. If you don't, guess what I'm going to say. Make sure you have set up your flashcard system, whether it's the physical flashcards or the digital ones, for revising the language features Bible. And once it's set up, don't stop revising them until you've done the WACE exam. An understanding of language features is absolutely essential if you want to pass English ATAR confidently. Example of mood in a visual text. Let's see how those features that we just saw manifest in an example. We're going to discuss how each one of those features that we just saw work to create a mood in one of the most famous scenes in movie history. The movie is called Psycho. It came out in 1960. It was directed by Alfred Hitchcock, who I mentioned a few lessons ago. And the scene that we're analyzing is the so-called shower scene. The link to this scene is in the resources tab below this video. Go give it a watch, come back once you're done. If you haven't seen the movie before or even just seen that scene before, you probably would have recognized the music that was playing in the background. It's become iconic, and obviously this movie was where it originated from. Speaking of music, the musical score in the shower scene employs the sounds of screeching violins, violas, and cellos, which create a sinister and panicked mood. Turning to lighting, the chiaroscuro, which just refers to the harsh contrast of black and white lighting, as we can see in this image, heightens a sense of mystery and suspense as the murderer approaches the camera yet is completely silhouetted and the audience doesn't know the killer's identity. How about color? Obviously, the scene is black and white, but that doesn't mean color isn't used. Sorry for the double negative, color is still used. The most effective use of color in the scene is the woman's blood mixed in the shower water running into the drain. Fun fact, to clearly show the color of blood in a black and white movie, Hitchcock, the director, actually used chocolate sauce. The stuff you put on ice cream and it goes hard in a few seconds. Anyway, the blood is important in this scene because there is no visual depiction of the woman getting stabbed. Not once does the audience actually see the knife going into the woman's body. So it's the blood, among other things like sound effects, screams, and music, that tell the audience that the woman has been stabbed and face some fatal bodily injuries. Next up is setting. The setting of the shower is important because it emphasizes the vulnerability of the victim, of the woman. When you think about it, perhaps with the one exception of your bed while you're sleeping, there really isn't any other place than the shower where you're more vulnerable. What about costume? Similar to the discussion about location, the costume, or lack thereof, is quite effective quite simply because the woman is naked in the shower. She's at her most vulnerable. It's not as though she's wearing layers and layers of clothes that could soften the blow of the knife attacks in any way. Editing is a big one in this scene. There are over 90 cuts in the 45 seconds when the murderer is attacking the victim. That's 2 cuts every second. This kind of fast-paced editing makes the scene feel frantic, contributing to its horrific nature. Lastly, there's camera shot and angle. We won't go into movement, but it is still certainly relevant when it comes to creating mood in a visual text. Just think about the effect of a shaky cam in creating a mood. This medium shot of the murderer is at eye level, as though it's the point of view of the woman in the shower. This makes the audience feel like they're in the woman's shoes, so to speak, enhancing how terrifying the scene is. With all of that said, what can we actually say about the mood of the scene? We could say it's frantic, which means distraught with fear. This is mainly created through the fast-paced editing that we discussed a moment ago. We could say it's suspenseful, which means uncertainty or expectation about something that may happen. And this is evidenced by the lack of music before the killer walks into the bathroom, which suggests something is about to happen. We could also say the mood's mysterious, meaning difficult to identify or explain. And this is created through the harsh backlighting, which has the effect of shadowing the murderer's face. You could argue the mood is sinister, meaning something harmful is about to happen. And this manifests in the scene when we see the outline of the killer's body through the shower curtains. Lastly, we could say the mood is panicked, meaning there's a sudden uncontrollable fear or anxiety. One of the main features that establish this panicked mood is the screeching violins that play while the killer is attacking the woman. How about mood in written texts? There are 6 main features that influence the construction of mood in written texts. Once again, these aren't all the features, but if you're a mere mortal like me who isn't trying to top the state in English ATAR or anything like that, what we're about to go through will be more than enough for you. Firstly, diction, figurative language, imagery, setting, syntax, and tone. Let's see, once again, how those features manifest in an example. Our sample text for mood in written text is a book called The Midnight Library. This is probably the happiest sad book I've read, and yes, it has made it on the bookshelf. If your parents like reading, I wouldn't be surprised if they've read it or at least heard of it. The extract is kind of lengthy, so I'm not going to put it up on the slides, but I will read it out. Nora Seed sat in the warmth of the small library at Hazeldean School in the town of Bedford. She stared at a chessboard on a low table. Nora dear, it's natural to worry about your future, said the librarian, Mrs. Elm, her eyes glimmering like sunshine on frost. Mrs. Elm made her first move, a knight hopping over the neat row of white pawns. Of course, you're going to be worried about the exams, but you could be anything you want to be, Nora. Think of all that possibility. It's exciting. Yes, I suppose it is. A whole life in front of you. A whole life. You could do anything, live anywhere, somewhere a bit less cold and wet. Nora pushed a pawn forward 2 spaces. It was hard not to compare Mrs. Elm to her mother, who treated Nora like a mistake in need of correction. For instance, when she was a baby, her mother had been so worried Nora's left ear stuck out more than her right that she'd used sticky tape to address the situation, then disguised it beneath a woolen bonnet. I hate the cold and wet, added Mrs. Elm for emphasis. Mrs. Elm had short grey hair and a kind and mildly crinkled oval face sitting pale above her turtle green polo neck. She was quite old, but she was also the person most on Nora's wavelength in the entire school, and even on days when it wasn't raining, she would spend her afternoon break in the small library. Coldness and wetness don't always go together, Nora told her. Antarctica is the driest continent on Earth. Technically, it's a desert. Well, that sounds up your street. I don't think it's far away enough. Maybe you should be an astronaut, travel the galaxy. Nora smiled. The rain is even worse on other planets. Worse than Bedfordshire? On Venus, it is pure acid. That's the excerpt. Now let's look at some of those textual features that are used in the excerpt to create some moods. Firstly, diction. In the excerpt, emotive language is especially relevant. So consider the effect of the emboldened words in creating a mood. Worry about your future. Somewhere a bit less cold and wet. I hate the cold and wet. The rain is even worse on the other planets. And on Venus, it is pure acid. Next up, figurative language. And a nice and easy one to identify at that. Who treated Nora like a mistake in need of correction. In this part of the sentence, the word like is telling us that a simile is being used. And this simile powerfully establishes the protagonist's, Nora's, strained relationship with her mother. How about imagery? Specifically, visual imagery is employed through the use of descriptive language. A good example of that is this sentence. Mrs. Elm had short grey hair and a kind and mildly crinkled oval face sitting pale above her turtle green polo neck. She was quite old. One of the first lines in the excerpt tells us that the setting is a small library at Hazeldean School in the town of Bedford. Readers are told at the outset that both the immediate setting of the library as well as the broader setting of Bedford are cosy, intimate, and perhaps even isolated places. You will recall from the LFB and the lesson on structure that syntax just refers to sentence structure. As I read out the following examples, I'd like you to try and identify a pattern in them. What's similar about these examples? Yes, I suppose it is. A whole life. I don't think it's far enough away. The rain is even worse on other planets. The pattern is that the syntax is very short. The sentences are short. This makes Nora's responses to Mrs. Elm sound almost blunt, indicating not necessarily that Nora doesn't like Mrs. Elm. In fact, it's implied that Nora and Mrs. Elm are quite close, but rather that Nora is quite apathetic or robotic. Finally, tone. We haven't addressed tone yet, but suffice it to say that it refers to the general character of a piece of writing and is established through diction and syntax, word choice and sentence structure. I couldn't find a good graphic of tone, so I've just used a potato man. So, a whole life. This is what Nora says when Mrs. Elm says to Nora, you have a whole life in front of you. Think about how this response creates a different tone to a response like, yes, you know what? You're so right. Nora's response suggests that she's unenthused and perhaps quite overwhelmed by the idea of a whole life. Those are the features, but what can we say about the mood? We could say it's despondent, as in low spirits, which was evidenced when Mrs. Elm said it's natural to worry about your future. We could say a melancholic mood, which means reflective sadness, was established when Nora remarked a whole life. And finally, we could say the mood is glum, looking or feeling sad, by way of Nora remarking that Antarctica isn't far enough. And that is mood in visual texts. Here is a very important tip for discussing mood. I've alluded to it a few times already in this lesson, but I want to emphasize it now. Both of the examples that we just looked at, Psycho, the Midnight Library, they used adjectives to describe the mood. In light of that, our key takeaway is, whenever describing the mood or moods of a text or a part of a text, always use at least one adjective. This might sound like an obvious thing, but it is absolutely vital that you use an adjective or two to explain the mood or moods in a given text. If you can use a variety of adjectives to describe the mood in a given text accurately, the marker will be very impressed. Make sure you know the meaning of the word or words that you're using to describe the mood. If you don't, the effort will fall flat and the marker will see straight through it. We've already used a few adjectives to describe mood, but let's see what they look like when we're using those adjectives in complete sentences. A frantic and mysterious mood is created in the shower scene in Psycho through the respective use of fast-paced editing and harsh backlighting. A despondent and contemplative mood is established in the opening passage of The Midnight Library through the use of emotive language and short syntax. I get it, these words, frantic, mysterious, despondent, contemplative, these aren't words that we use in day-to-day conversation, so I've included this list of adjectives that you can use to describe mood in the PDF study notes. The next topic that I want to touch on very briefly is the influence of mood on our response to a text. We haven't looked at this concept of response just yet, but I'd like to point this out here to reinforce the fact that an understanding of mood can be really helpful when you're answering a question that doesn't explicitly include the term mood. We now know that the definition of mood is the feeling created by text, and an example is Psycho constructs a frantic and mysterious mood. Note the use of two adjectives in that example. This little arrow in the table tells us that mood influences our response to a text. Our definition of response, which will make much more sense later on in this module, is a feeling or emotion experienced by a person as a result of their interpretation of a text. And an example is the frantic and mysterious mood constructed in Psycho generated a frightened response. This is basically saying that all of those different textual features like lighting, music, color, editing, and so on that were used in the Psycho shower scene created a frantic and mysterious mood, and in turn, that made me feel frightened. Last but not least, past WACE exam questions. Now you know what mood is and how it's created, the main question becomes, why is it important? How do I actually use that information in an exam context? There are two scenarios. The first is analyzing mood, and you analyze mood in the comprehending section and responding section because those questions, as we know from previous lessons, require you to analyze texts. The second scenario is creating mood, and you create mood in the composing section because these questions require you to create a text. Let's discuss analyzing mood first. This relates to the comprehending section and the responding section. Analyzing mood involves stating the mood or moods, stating which textual features influence the construction of the mood or moods, and explaining how each textual feature constructs the mood or moods. Let's see how we can apply those three steps in answering this question. How have language or structural innovations been used to unsettle an audience in at least one text? 2018 WACE exam, section 2, question 9. If this question sounds familiar, it's because we looked at it briefly in the lesson on structure in relation to the opening scene of Spider-Man No Way Home. Just a quick reminder, this phrase, language or structural innovations, basically means language features or structural features that are innovative, unique, unexpected, or different. Even though the question doesn't explicitly include the word mood in it, I can nonetheless incorporate a discussion of mood by writing something like this. The use of visual language innovations such as fast-paced editing, black and white color, and screeching violins work to create a frantic and sinister mood, which in turn unsettles the audience. The fast-paced editing manifests in the shower scene through the use of over 90 cuts in 45 seconds. Black and white color is superbly utilized in one notable shot of the scene, whereby a close-up shot of the drain in the shower depicts the woman's blood spiraling into the drain's abyss. Layered on top of the rapid editing and harrowing bloody visuals is the iconic musical score of the film, which features a high-pitched violin that mimics a screeching sound. These visual language innovations were regarded as groundbreaking feats in cinema when they were first viewed over 60 years ago and continue to effectively disturb viewers today through their construction of a frantic and sinister mood. We've kind of skirted around this question, but let's just tackle it head on. When can you incorporate a discussion of mood when answering a question that doesn't explicitly include the concept. In a nutshell, whenever you're responding to an analyzing question, so any question in section 1 or section 2 of the exam, you're going to have to refer to language features. If a bunch of those language features that you're referring to happen to be any of the ones that we've looked at that create mood, then there's scope to discuss mood. And that is what we saw in this sample response. Editing, color, music, those are 3 textual features that contribute to the creation of a mood. So I tied in a discussion of mood in the final sentence. Moving on, creating mood. How do we go about this in the composing section of the exam? Creating mood involves determining in your plan, firstly, the mood or moods you want to convey, and secondly, the textual features you'll use to convey it. Let's see how we might do that in relation to this question. In a form of your choice, create a text that explores a mood or idea from this image that comes from the 2017 WACE exam, section 3, question 12. And this is the relevant image. As an aside, if you decided to explore the mood part of this question instead of the idea part, that would be a great way to impress the marker because most students would shy away from this concept of mood because it's just more complex than idea. So you'd be distinguishing yourself from the crowd. If 2,000 students in WA answered this question in the WACE exam, I would say probably 1,800 of them would have chosen to explore idea. Your ability to stand out from the crowd is much greater if you're being compared to 200 responses versus 1,800. And ultimately, that is why learning the concepts in Module 2 is so important because once you understand them, you've got the flexibility to answer any question you want and answer those questions really well to impress the marker, get great marks, pass English, get straight into university, live a good life. So, part of my plan to this question could look like this. Moods I want to convey, foreboding, mysterious, and tense, and it states the textual features I'll use to convey them, which are diction, setting, and imagery. Once again, don't worry if you're unsure what this might look like in an actual composing section response. Module 5 will show you all of that. Before we wrap up, a key takeaway. Mood is more effective and relevant in imaginative text than in interpretive and persuasive texts. That also means mood is mainly a thing in fictional rather than non-fictional texts. That's all the main content for the lesson. Simple summary time. Firstly, we looked at a definition of mood, and our definition is simply the feeling created by a text. Then we looked at the construction of mood. There are several textual features that influence the construction of mood in visual text. We've got music, lighting, color, setting, costume, editing, camera shot, angle, and movement. Example of mood in a visual text, a frantic, suspenseful, mysterious, sinister, and panicked mood in the shower scene in Psycho. Then we looked at mood in written texts, and the textual features that influence the construction of mood in written texts are diction, figurative language, imagery, setting, syntax, and tone. Our example for this one was a despondent, melancholic, contemplative, and glum mood in the opening passage of The Midnight Library. A tip for discussing mood: when describing the mood or moods of a text or a part of a text, always use at least one adjective. The influence of mood on our response to a text. The mood of a text can influence our response to it. For example, the frantic and mysterious mood of Psycho made me feel frightened. Past WACE exam questions. Firstly, we looked at analyzing mood, and that relates to completing questions from the comprehending section or responding section. Analyzing mood involves stating the mood or moods, stating which textual features influence the construction of the mood or moods, and then explaining how each textual feature constructs the mood or moods. As far as creating mood goes, that involves determining the mood or moods you want to convey and the textual features you'll use to convey it. Finally, that key takeaway at the end, mood is more effective and relevant in imaginative texts, such as novels, than in interpretive and persuasive texts, such as blog posts and persuasive speeches, respectively. That's all I wanted to say about mood. Make sure you go and complete the activities that relate to this lesson. Just one text table, nice and easy. And completing it is a great way to consolidate your understanding of language features. All the best with that. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep it simple.